Good morning and welcome to today's session of this NPTEL course titled Introduction to World Literature. We are looking at another piece of poem. This is by Sylvia Plath, who is an American poet. She lived during the late modernist period. That's from the 1930s till 1960. She had died very young. She died at the age of 30. She committed suicide. She was also the wife of the another fellow American poet, Ted Hughes. There are a lot of personal details about her which would also help us understand the kind of poetry that she had been writing and the ways in which the personal and the political intersect in her ideas of feminism, in her ideas of self, and in the way she looked at various institutions which also acted as fetters as far as women and lives were concerned. So, The Applicant is one of her poems where you find her at her best in terms of her humor and this splitting contempt. So, what does the title remind us of when we see the title, The Applicant? It reminds us of the context of a job interview. It's about someone who's applying for a position, but gradually into the poem, you realize that it has got to do nothing with a job application, but this is about marriage, and this is about placing marriage within the marketplace that it had become by the time that this poem was getting written. It said that this poem was written in October 1962 and it was first published in the London Magazine. That was in 1963, and this appeared in a book titled Ariel in 1965. And this has also become a very classic volume full of powerful poetry by Sylvia Plath. And there was also a lot of controversy surrounding its content and editorship because it was also posthumous in nature. To get a sense of how this poem sounds and about the tone that it sets, the setting of it right at the outset, I'll read out to you the first couple of stanzas. The Applicant by Sylvia Plath. First, are you our sort of a person? Do you wear a glass eye, false teeth or a crutch, a brace or a hook, rubber breast or a rubber crotch, stitches to show something is missing? No? No? Then how can we give you a thing? Stop crying, open your hand, empty, empty. Here's a hand. To fill it, and willing to bring teacups and roll away headaches and do whatever you tell it. Will you marry it? It is guaranteed. To thumb shut your eyes at the end and dissolve of sorrow. The poem gives away what it is about right at the outset. It's about marriage, and there is a man who is being asked certain questions by the speaker, and we also get to know that one of the powerful things behind the satire of this poem is that it's not really targeting the man, it's not really targeting anyone in person, it's targeting the system. It's also showing us how certain things are very deeply rooted, deeply ingrained, that there's no way of getting out of it. So this is a poem that explores the meaning of marriage, the gender stereotypes and the social pressures, and how this poem becomes extremely relevant and powerful is in the way how it shows that even men are victims of this stereotype. They are also under a lot of social pressure to do what is required of them. And look at a series of questions at the beginning about whether there are artificial parts, and it also draws our attention to the kind of artificiality and the kind of many unnatural things which were increasingly being used to boost the looks of both men and women. It draws our attention to the artificiality which had set in by the 1960s, and this poem is written in the 1960s. And what is the relevance of 1960s, especially in the American and European context? That's a time when the second wave of feminism had begun to set in. So when we look at this poem from the context of the second wave of feminism, it begins to make more sense. That's also the time when marriage as an institution began to be questioned from various angles. And this is also the time that feminism as a movement, it began to move from merely the activist political articulations, and it began to enter the households. And in America particularly, this is the time when the baby boom, the baby boom years are also happening. This is right after the Second World War, and there is a lot of focus on the family, on making babies literally. And during this time, we also know that it's a time when the Beat generation happens. There are a lot of things, a lot of protests going on from the fields of culture, music, writing, where there is a very active way in which voices are being raised and projected against this domination of institutions, which also by extension try to reinforce the stereotypes of gender, of institutions related to marriage, about conventions, about conforming to certain things which are considered more important than perhaps articulating oneself, than perhaps giving a sense of agency to oneself. So this poem also needs to be read in that context. And as mentioned earlier, it is a system, it's the overall institution which is being targeted over here. And it's also quite amazing the way in which she also brings in the political element to it, the political angle to it through such a lucidly written poem. The subversion which is taking place is in a very, very sarcastic way. And you need to be there to actually get it. You need to know the context, the political, social developments of that period to really get what she is hinting at. And as far as Sylvia Plath is concerned, she led a very nonconformist, very controversial life. And she also believed that marriage is an institution which may totally take away the creativity that she was gifted with. And if we look at it from along the lines of the revolution that Simone de Beauvoir and Virginia Woolf had set in, the way in which Virginia Woolf spoke about a room of one's own, the way in which she was trying to carve out a space for herself while being caught within the domestic chores and the mundaneness of domesticity, we find that Sylvia Plath is radically different from that. While in Woolf's writings, we find her trying to carve out a space, we find in Sylvia Plath that she's trying to get out of it completely. There's no way in which she's trying to negotiate it in a peaceful way. She wants to get out of the system and she wants to show that the system is completely worthless and there is no point trying to negotiate with it in a non-radical, peaceful way, and the easier you get out of it, it gets the better. So that's a kind of radical articulation that second wave feminism also brings, and it's not just about trying to refine and reform the system by staying within it. It's also about getting out of it in radical ways as far as it is possible. And this poem tells us about how ridiculous and how meaningless and how completely irrational this system is, the method, the process which goes on while one is trying to get into this system of marriage, while one is trying to fit oneself within the system of marriage. And hand, obviously, here's a hand to fill it and willing to bring teacups and roll away headaches and do whatever you tell it. The hand, of course, signifies this woman whose hand is going to be given in marriage to this man to whom the speaker is talking, to whom the speaker is addressing. And what is this hand supposed to do? What is this woman supposed to do whose hand is going to be given in marriage to this man? This hand is supposed to bring teacups and roll away headaches, as mundane as it gets. And that is the significance which also is being used to subvert the entire institution. And look at the way in which the hand, the woman, is denied of any kind of agency. Not to say that the man has a choice here. He is also being forced to be a part of this because this is a need, a social need, a compulsion that he feels. I also want you to recall the opening lines of Pride and Prejudice, where Jane Austen in the 19th century tells us that it's a well-known fact that a man who is in possession of good wealth is also looking out for a wife. And that's that kind of setting that Sylvia Plath is also trying to subvert and question and radically reinvent over here. So the poem continues to progress in the form of an interview. The man who is in question over here, he's being interviewed over here. And this man could be anyone, regardless of his background, his context. If you look at the way in which the poem proceeds, we get to know that it really doesn't matter from where the man is coming, where he is being positioned. It remains pretty much the same across time and space, and it becomes more relevant in the 1960s, of course, and we can also see that it has really changed even in the contemporary. This mode of interviewing, the expectations and what is being expected, all of that remains the same in a very ironical and in a very alarming way. Will you marry it? It is guaranteed to thumb shut your eyes at the end and dissolve of sorrow. We make you talk from the salt. I notice you're stark naked. How about this suit? Black and stiff, but not a bad fit. Will you marry it? So the man is being made ready for the occasion. And the black suit, which fits well, it is a symbol for marriage, the actual ceremony of getting married. And we know that in this process, from the time the hand is being identified and handed over to the man and this ceremony of getting married, there's hardly any gap between this. There is no need to identify things such as love or connection or the romantic ideas of made for each other, nothing of that sort. It is very, very simple, very, very straightforward, because a man needs to get married, and as long as he is sure to have met the right kind of expectations, he also can be ready with the suit to go get married. It's as simple as that, very, very matter of fact. And this is what Sylvia Plath is also trying to subvert, and very, very brutally in a sarcastic way. And she's also trying to intervene in this debate about the role of women during this time and about questioning what exactly the women do in contributing to the socio-political developments of this period. I want you to also think about the Beat generation during this time. In the post 1970s and 1980s, feminist scholarship has also tried to address the question of the role of women in the 1960s, which was also considered as a very radically reinventing phase as far as music, literature and culture, especially in the context of Europe and America, was concerned. And if we again take the case of the Beat generation in particular, we will also see that it was an all-men affair. And the women, whenever they were mentioned, they just were positioned as either these partners or as girlfriends of these leading Beat writers. So as much as the Beat generation and the leading writers and artists of those times, much as they tried to subvert the system, much as they tried to radically question the way in which things were getting institutionalized, patriarchy was very, very rarely questioned, and patriarchy could not be subverted in the ways that they were trying to. And this is something that writers like Sylvia Plath is also trying to get at. And it's also about the complete lack of agency, not just from the side of the woman, but also from the side of the man. And this is what makes this poem very, very real and very hard-hitting, because as mentioned earlier, there's no way in which the man is targeted. It's the patriarchy, it's the system which is being targeted in a very, very powerful way. And what makes this all the more exciting is the fact that this is being written even before the third wave of feminism had hit, even before the third wave of feminism had begun to sink in. And this continues to be relevant. The sarcasm is still not lost even when we read this today after these decades which have passed in between. And it continues to show how a woman is best treated as a domestic thing. And look at the way in which the pronoun it is being used completely. So it takes away any kind of identity that the woman is supposed to have. There's absolutely no way in which the woman is given a sense of agency or any other purpose to serve except being handed over in marriage to the man who is in question here. Will you marry it? It is waterproof, shatterproof, proof against fire and bombs through the roof. Believe me, they'll bury you in it. So there is a function that the woman is supposed to perform, but that's only within the context of marriage. Unless she is located very conveniently within the institution of marriage in connection with a man, her function is not complete at all. That's what this poem is also trying to subvert and question and very, very sarcastically undermine. And the strength and resilience of a woman, which is expected of marriage, that's also being mocked it over here, about how it is waterproof, shatterproof, proof against fire and bombs. And it is also questioning this idea of marriage, the eternity of it, which is sanctified through the ceremony of marriage, through the ritual of marriage, by indicating that the woman is supposed to stay strong, come what may. And this is the idea which is being radically questioned in the 1960s as well. But at the same time, if you're familiar with the history, the political history of America, you would also get to know that the 1960s is a time when the state is also intervening in a powerful way to ensure that family as a system remains intact. And that is one of the things that the state is also using as a defense mechanism to bring the nation together, to build up closely knit families, to deeply ingrain the values of domesticity, the values of relationships in the context of family. And writers like Sylvia Plath, they also find this extremely delimiting. And as far as Plath is concerned, and we also know this through the many writings that are available from her journals and her, especially in her work, The Bell Jar, how she found the roots of patriarchy growing deep and deep into every system which was getting institutionalized, and how she found herself being suffocated with that to such an extent that she just decided to end her life at the young age of 30. While this poem remains very, very sarcastic, it's also about a certain kind of a fear that Plath is expressing. The fear that domesticity would interfere with her creativity, and that the mundane chores, the daily life of domesticity, the kids, about how the figure of a husband and everything would undermine her writing seriously, how that would undermine her personality itself, and how that would radically change what she is and make her to fit into something that she does not want to fit herself in. And that's the fear that this poem also captures in a wonderful way. Now your head, excuse me, is empty. I have the ticket for that. Come here, sweetie, out of the closet. Well, what do you think of that? Naked as paper to start, but in 25 years she'll be silver, in 50 gold. It's talking about the permanence of this institution. Of course, it is overtly presenting a very rosy picture, which is also the promise that this institution apparently offers to one. But at the same time, the prospect is also very, very daunting and frightening as far as this poem is concerned. And it talks about how the speaker, perhaps the speaker also stands for the society, and it really does not matter what gender the speaker belongs to. No matter what gender the speaker belongs to, the voice is that of the society. It's the society speaking for the man and making decisions for the woman and saying that I have the ticket for it, it's all under control, I have taken care of everything. And look at the term used here, sweetie, come here sweetie, out of the closet. It is a word, an endearing word, which also comes in as very, very condescending at this point of time. It does not have any idea about love over here. It has an upper hand, trying to tell the man and the woman, though the addressee is mostly the man here, trying to tell the man and the woman that we have taken care of everything. You just need to do what is expected of you and not deviate from those conventions that you are supposed to follow. But in 25 years, she'll be silver, in 50 gold. A living doll wherever you look. Look at the imagery of the doll. And I can't help recalling A Doll's House by Ibsen, late 19th century, and how Nora, the lead protagonist, how she is forced to walk out of the doll house, the family within which she was living, tired of being treated as a doll, tired of being taken care of. And this imagery is very, very hard to miss over here. And in the late 19th century, as we know, when The Doll's House was first staged in Norway first and then across Europe, including Britain, it was a major blow to the conventions. When Ibsen's plays were staged, it was even considered as an open sewage that would corrupt the society. And in Doll's House, incidentally, the husband, Torvald, he's not necessarily a bad sort of a person. He is the one who wants to take care of the family. The only thing which he is denying the wife, Nora, is a sense of agency. And that's enough to make her work out. That moment when she realizes whether it's worth staying with this man who places his own honor, his own sense of reputation above everything else. And the moment she realizes that she was being treated as a doll, and there also we find she's not necessarily blaming Torvald for it, and she traces it back. The roots of it are being traced back to patriarchy, even though the term itself is not mentioned in any way. And she realizes that she was always treated as a doll, first by her father and later by her husband. She was always being treated as a doll a very convenient arrangement where she's always told what to do, where she's always taken care of, her needs are being taken care of, she is being baby talked to incessantly. And this is something that begins to hit her very hard. And once that realization comes in, she finds it difficult to stay back, not even for the sake of kids. And that's a kind of radicalism that had hit Europe from the late 19th century, and it only gets more and more cemented in a radical way. But in the 1960s, what makes it even more poignant is the fact that during a time, even when the mechanisms of the state, even when various institutions are trying to hammer down the significance of the family, the significance of sticking to conventions, we find these voices moving away from what is expected, moving out of the confinement, moving out of the status of conforming, and radically questioning these institutions and the value systems which could totally delimit the potential of not just women but also men in significant ways. And from the 1960s onwards, we also find a lot of scholarship emerging from the context of feminism, and this is also the time when we find that the nexus between these various forms of systems which undermine the possibilities of minorities in terms of ethnicity, in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of region, all of these things are highlighted, and we find an intersection, a sort of a dialogue across these various articulations. So this poem also needs to be read in that larger context and not merely as an attempt to expose the flaw or the inherent fallacy of the institution marriage, which is being questioned here. So what is this doll supposed to do? It can sew, it can cook, it can talk. It works, there's nothing wrong with it. So as long as it works, as long as it can perform these basic functions, everything is fine. If it can sew and cook, and if it can talk, if it can just entertain you and then do whatever is basically needed, mend clothes or feed you well, it should be fine. The man is being conditioned to accept that there's nothing more that you should expect. As long as the basic needs are met, it's fine. And what Plath finds extremely problematic here perhaps is the complete absence of an intellectual compatibility that she also believed in. Though she lived with a man who was also a fellow poet, Ted Hughes, we find that she was deeply dissatisfied, and history also tells that soon after Plath's death, Hughes was also deeply devastated. They did not have a very rosy marriage. There were issues always throughout, and in her journals and in her writing, she also had conveyed that it is the institution which had to be blamed, that it is impossible for an intellectually craving woman and independent woman to stay happy within these confinements. One may choose to disagree with it, one may choose to have different opinions about it, and there is of course a lot of instances perhaps to prove it otherwise. But the importance of this poem is that it subverted everything and it has reduced everything to the minimal basic things, that it's very hard hitting and it's difficult for us not to see the splitting contempt which is there throughout. And look at the words which are used in this poem. There's nothing profound about the way in which it is stated. It's very, very simple. It has broken down the entire institution into very, very simple terms about the basic functions, about the basic expectations, which are also quite frightening in a significant way. It works, there is nothing wrong with it. You have a whole, it's a poultice, you have an eye, it's an image. My boy, it's your last resort. Will you marry it? Marry it, marry it. There's a sense of urgency towards the end, as if this is your last resort. You either get hold of it, you either claim it now, or perhaps you will not get another chance. Look at the amount of social pressure which is being exerted not just on the woman but on the man as well. And look at how the speaker is completely in control, completely in charge. And here, it's not just the woman who's being denied of an agency. The man does not seem to have an agency either. We do not find, the poem does not even indicate that the man is trying to respond. And that the only kind of response that speaker also tells this, his addressee, how can we give you a thing? Stop crying, open your hand. There's a desperation into which the man is also being forced into. And by the end, it's almost like persuading the man to agree. Will you marry it? Marry it? Marry it? It seems as if there's a sense of agency, but it is not there at all. As if there's no choice left, the man has to either marry it or completely let go of this last chance. As the poem says, my boy, it's your last resort. Look at the way the word my boy is also used, very, very condescending, very, very patronizing. And one of the larger things that this poem is trying to do is that the victim of patriarchy need not be the woman alone. It's both the men and women who are caught within this situation. And this realization has radically reinvented the kind of feminism, the kind of feminist politics that has come to stay from the 1960s onwards. And even today, when the systems are being questioned and when the ideologies are being radically reinvented and reshaped, when the politics is being defined and refined in multiple ways, it's this realization which remains at the heart of it. It's this realization which also continues to be seen as one of the foundational things when one talks about feminism in the larger context. So in the framework of an interview, within the framework of a very, very conventional interview, what the poem is trying to do is that the male interviewee is being given a chance to own something. So the woman is also seen as a property. Will you marry it? Marry it? Marry it? It is almost like being given a good property to own, a good investment, something which you cannot afford to miss at all, to claim right away, to claim your ownership over it, and then use that as a commodity which will in the next 25 years become silver, and then in the next 50 years turn into gold. So this is like a prized possession and a good investment. So here the figure of the woman, the moment she gets transformed into within this institution as a wife, she also becomes a commodity, a thing of the marketplace, which will continue to give you certain returns in terms of prestige, in terms of revenue, in terms of social upgradation in multiple ways. And it also ensures that the applicant is also the right kind of person to receive it. So more than compatibility at an emotional level, at an intellectual level, what here is being shown is whether there is a social compatibility which can also be showcased in very rosy ways. And finally, before we wrap up, look at the framework of the poem, look at the structure of the poem. The poetic lines break away very awkwardly, and it's very hard to miss. There is no structure which can be identified. There's no form to which it sticks. It's at some level, it's also suggesting that to be able to fit in, to be able to fit in very, very well, and to be able to claim this thing which is being offered in terms of marriage, in terms of the figure of a wife, you also need to lose something. Look at the beginning of a poem where the speaker is also finding out whether there is something missing, which also indicates that it's not really perfection that the speaker is looking for. It's only about the willingness to give away something, the willingness to not remain true to oneself, and the willingness to adapt, and the willingness to fit into conventions that would make the applicant also a perfect one, someone who can really, really fit in. It's also an extension of the capitalist economy which had begun to set in, and the expectations of the marketplace. Finally, pay attention to the tone, which also indicates the consumerism and the societal pressure, which also reinforces stereotypes in multiple ways. And as we all know, the 1960s is the time when commercialism and when the demands of the market had begun to set in multiple ways. And we also see this influencing the turn of events as far as the shift from modernism to postmodernism is concerned. We knew about the various things which changed as far as the marketplace is concerned, about the ways in which television shows began to change, about the ways in which the idea of culture, the idea of producing art for the consumerist society, how all of those began to change. So this poem needs to be read within that larger context to make sense of how it deliberately tries to situate, particularly the institution of marriage over here, within these frameworks out of which it is trying to break away as well. So as we wrap up, I wanted to pay attention to how it continues to be relevant in today's society, in the contemporary world, where marriage and relationships, the institutionalized frameworks of it. They continue to be situated in the high-powered world of commercial markets, and that's perhaps the greatest satire. That's perhaps the most hard-hitting sarcasm that this poem leaves us with, and it continues to stay relevant across these decades, though this was published in the 1960s. And Sylvia Plath herself had spoken thus about this poem. I leave you with that. In this poem, the speaker is an executive, a sort of exacting super salesman. He wants to be sure the applicant for his marvelous product really needs it and will treat it right. So it is the marketplace that she also had in mind. And for your information, there is also a reading by Sylvia Plath herself, which is available online. And many say, her admirers say, that it's one of the best that you can find in terms of her reading. I also encourage you to access it and take a look at this poem and also be familiar with the ideas of the second wave feminism, within the context of which this poem and its articulations begin to make more sense. Hopefully we will also get a chance to look at second wave feminism and look at how that had radically changed the way in which women's writing began to be read and began to be conceived within the larger patriarchal structures of not just society, but also about literary reading and literary context and criticism. I thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session.